President Trump continuing to talk about Russia today and once again contradicting himself. Even the clarifications need clarification, and one thing clear, there is no clarity about his position on Russian meddling. Plus, what can Congress do about Russia and President Trump? Forget about the tough talk. What about action? Do Republicans have any appetite to take on their own president? Is there a line he could cross that could actually cause them to act? Also, our Dominic Carter back in studio after his tri-state corruption tour. He's covered a half a dozen trials over the past couple of years. He's here to fill us in and take a look at what is next on the docket. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Richard French. Well, tonight, we're going to take a look at the insanity, frankly, over President Trump's meeting with Putin and examine it from several angles, including Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney will join us live. The New York Democrat will talk about how dangerous the president's behavior is and also what the scene is like on Capitol Hill. Also, my conversation with ABC News political director Rick Klein on the politics of this whole thing. Plus, this is all unfolding as the Russia probe heats up. My conversation with former federal prosecutor Roland Riepeld on the latest developments. And trust me, there are many. But we will start at the White House and President Trump's cabinet meeting today, where he spoke about Putin, bragged about how great he's doing, and more.
We're doing very well, probably as well as anybody has ever done with Russia. And there's been no president ever as tough as I have been on Russia. And I think President Putin knows that better than anybody, certainly a lot better than the media. He understands it, and he's not happy about it. And he shouldn't be happy about it, because there's never been a president as tough on Russia as I have been.
Trump was also asked whether or not he thought Russia was still meddling. Remember now, all U.S. intelligence agencies, including folks that Trump has appointed himself, they all say with unanimity that yes, Russia still is. Take a listen to your president.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Thank
Press,
you very
let's
much,
go.
ma'am.
Make your
Now, of course, that directly contradicts what his Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, had to say. Just take a listen, because there's no vagaries here.
It was in the months prior to September 2001 when, according to then CIA Director George Tenet, the system was blinking red. And here we are nearly two decades later, and I'm here to say the warning lights are blinking red. In regards to state actions, Russia has been the most aggressive foreign actor, no question.
Again, that from the DNI, a Trump appointee. So here's where things get frankly ridiculous. And again, a couple of hours after Trump clearly said he didn't believe Russia was still hacking, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says just the opposite. Take a listen.
We believe that the threat still exists, which is why we are taking steps to prevent it. Again, you wouldn't go through that lengthy process if you weren't.
Of course, that led to the inevitable questions about why Trump then said Russia wasn't still meddling. Here, part of the food fight.
So despite the video that shows the president looking at Cecilia and answering no to this question about whether Russia is still targeting the U.S., and despite multiple people in the room understanding that the president was responding to that question, and despite the president having never before said the word no repeatedly to usher reporters out of the room, you're saying it's a reverse. You're saying the president said this is
The first thing that the president said after the question was asked was "Thank you very much," and then he said, "No, I'm not answering any more questions." And even further, I think even Cecilia didn't realize what the answer was because she asked for clarification and he didn't answer the follow-up.
Cecilia Vega, by the way, clearly said the president looked directly at her and was saying no to the question. Now, this seems infantile, but given the stakes, I want to play again. It's clear as day, Trump directly answering her question about whether or not Russia was still at it. Again, the clip.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Thank you
Press,
very
let's
much,
go.
ma'am.
Make your
Okay, so with all that, let me bring in Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. He, a Democrat representing the Hudson Valley. He also staff secretary, I should mention, for President Bill Clinton, so he knows his way around an Oval Office and the inner workings of one at that. First, I want to get your take as we sit here on Wednesday evening. After what you saw in Helsinki and the run-up in this administration to that meeting, and the attempt to clean up on aisle 9, not once but twice, do you believe as we sit here tonight The President of the United States really believes that Russia was responsible for meddling in our election, and they're still doing so.
Well, the question is not so much what he believes as what the facts are and why he is saying something that is so clearly ridiculous. I did staff Bill Clinton at a summit in Moscow in 1998. I can tell you how much preparation and care is normally put into those events. The consequences are extraordinary. I mean, just think about the millions of people in Europe, in the Baltics, in Ukraine, in Syria, whose very lives and futures hang in the balance on these types of events. You don't wing it, you don't make it up as you go along. And the president's performance was bizarre and deeply disappointing, reckless, completely unnecessary. And then the walkbacks and the denials of what we all saw with our own eyes, not once but twice now, is beneath the dignity of the office. It's a mess, and it matters. And it's far past time when this president gets his act together and starts behaving like an adult. The rest of us depend on him doing his job.
People have even been harsher than that, Congressman. I'm wondering where your characterization of his job as our commander-in-chief is. You saw what Brennan had to say, that he said it was treasonous. Other people, even on Fox News, called it disgraceful. Other people said that it crossed the threshold from a high crime and misdemeanor, others dereliction of duty. Where do you put this president, as he puts our national security as a priority versus that of an enemy?
Look, I think that there's a term prosecutors use called consciousness of guilt, right? What really matters is whether the president is doing these things to obscure criminal activity or involvement that he is too ashamed or too embarrassed to admit of the Russians that he knew about during the campaign. Bob Mueller is getting very close to telling us exactly what happened. We've got a couple dozen Russians indicted. We've got a couple hundred charges filed. We have 5 guilty pleas. The guy's done a lot of work in a year. And the last piece is what Americans, if any, conspired with these Russians in these well-documented crimes. That's going to answer a lot of questions. And if that includes senior advisors to the president or the president himself, then all of this stuff looks very, very, very clearly like an attempt to obscure his own culpability. If Bob Mueller says he didn't do anything wrong, then the best thing you can say is he's behaving erratically and doing extraordinary damage to the Western alliance and to America's credibility in the world. Both are bad outcomes. One should lead to impeachment. The other is a good reason to throw him out on his ear at the next election.
Well, listen, you're not talking to a conspiracy theorist, okay? This is the opposite of InfoWars, but I got to tell you, I, for 2 years, have not found any rationale why a person who has never looked out for anyone's self-interest but his own defends at every turn, even in the indefensible, Vladimir Putin. Do you believe it's a legitimate question right now that many share, whether or not we have a compromised president?
Well, if he's innocent, he should stop acting so guilty, right? I mean, why the 2-hour meeting with no aides? What on earth are you saying to Vladimir Putin that your own chief of staff, that your national security advisor, that your CIA director cannot know, that your Secretary of State couldn't hear? How about your ambassador to Russia? Why are those people not allowed in the room? Or why don't we have a transcript of what was said if you want to preserve the intimacy of the conversation? That's just nuts, and it's unprecedented, and it stinks when there's so many questions that involve his relationship with this individual, who we know is a former KGB spy who engages in exactly the type of activities that are at issue here. Why on earth, a couple of days after these indictments, would the president go into a secret room with this guy and have this conversation? It sure looks guilty, if nothing else.
I've heard the words from the Speaker of the House. I heard the Senate Majority Leader stunningly basically say to NATO, don't listen to our president, trust us, we'll be there for you. And I've heard a lot of strong words, mostly from Republicans who were either deciding not to run for re-election here or basically said, I'm gone. To that end, I know the words, but how much willingness do you believe, really, whether it be additional sanctions, whether it be immunizing Mueller, whether it be to have hearings here to find out what happened behind the closed doors for those 2 hours, subpoenaing maybe even the stenographer? Forget all the rhetoric today. Come the 25th or thereabouts, will there be a willingness to buck the president among your colleagues on the other side of the aisle?
I wouldn't count on it. They have shown absolutely no backbone on this. and it's been a disgusting display. I mean, look, let me talk to the Republicans who are watching tonight. I mean, my God, my dad was a Republican, fought at the end of World War II in the Navy, got seriously banged up. I think he would have been disgusted by what the American president did in Helsinki this weekend. I mean, there used to be a time when all of us stood together as Americans and understood who our adversaries were. What in God's name are we accomplishing for a political party that is worth destroying the Western alliance, that is worth undermining the independence of Ukraine, of giving hope to the oppressors in Syria? I mean, what are we doing? Have we come so low in American politics that we're now scoring some political points somehow off of trading away our country's interests? That disgusts me, frankly. And I would like to think that people like John McCain, who have been very clear in their criticism of the president, even Newt Gingrich came out and took him to task. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it, my Republican friends. There are some Republicans who are finally, at last, seeing this clearly. The question is what they do about it. The question is whether we're going to stop talking and start acting. We should do all the things you just mentioned and more. We should act like an independent branch of government, and we should put a wall around the security interests of the United States and protect the American people from a reckless and incompetent president who may in fact be proceeding from a corrupt motive. That's our job as an independent branch of government. That's what the founders intended, is no matter how low the president sinks, the Congress is going to protect the people. We should do it.
Finally, and I bring you back to your earlier life when you were a staff secretary in an Oval, the idea that we've gotten reports that you literally have a chief of staff green-lighting Republicans on the Hill to go after his boss because of what happened in Helsinki. That, as I mentioned, Mitch McConnell having to assure our allies not to listen to their president. And I can go on ad nauseum of the idea that we still don't know what happened in those 2 hours, or you get my drift. Can you just assure the public, forget Republican or Democrat, this is not normal, this is completely unprecedented?
Oh, it's nuts. It's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I mean, there's nothing like this in modern American history that you can point to, and none of it makes any sense. And there's an old saying when you're a senior staffer that you cannot be better than your principal. No staffer, no chief of staff can ever be better than a bad president, than a bad senator, than a bad congressman. That's the truth. So it doesn't matter ultimately how much his own staff tries to clean up this mess. The president is the problem. And the president needs to get his act together before the rest of us pay the price. Or the rest of us need to wake up and make some big changes around here, or we're all gonna regret it, because the consequences of this summit are not the bad press conference. They're what President Putin does next in Ukraine, in Syria, in the Baltics, in North Korea, in 100 different areas where we need to be clear about what our interests are, who our allies are. And where's the next invasion of Crimea? Where is the next takeover or propping up of a dictator like the Russians have done in Syria? That's the problem, and that's what's coming. And that's why the Congress needs to get off its butt and act.
Well, if I was in Montenegro and I watched Fox News last night, I'd be worried as well. Congressman, thank you so much for a time. I certainly appreciate it.
My pleasure, Richard.
Okay, coming up next, everyone, you heard the perspective from somebody who is sitting in one of those 435 seats in the House. This is a political football, what our president has kicked off here. Democrats, as you hear, they want to go after Russia and the president. Even some Republicans talking good game, but so far, little promises of action. Will we finally see some profiles and courage from the GOP? I'll talk to a journalist who's covering it to find out where he thinks they go next.